Alright, tonight we're going to look at chapter 14 of the book of Revelation. And before we get into the particulars of it, what I want to do first is do the context, the forest and the trees thing that we've been doing. So what I want to do is back up the lens and think about where we are. You remember we talked about the sort of the proceeding of the seals to the trumpets as you get close to the castle, and then when you're at the castle, the very last thing that's going to happen is the pouring out of the bowls that we're talking about. That's the great tribulation. It's the outpouring of the wrath of God. And so we know that that's coming, but we're taking this pause, starting really with chapter 10, when you had the big angel in the little book, that looked like the coming storm. And then you had the two witnesses that, when you had the abomination of desolation there at the midpoint, sort of pointed to the midpoint of the tribulation. And then all of a sudden in chapter 12, you start getting these characters introduced. And if you were just reading it for the first time, you might think, why all of a sudden we have this vision of a woman with stars and sun and moon, and what's that all about? And then you start talking about these other characters. But, if we're thinking about this sort of build up to the place where that actual outpouring of the wrath of God is coming, what better way to work up to it than to sort of introduce or sort of develop the major characters who are going to be playing in that great tribulation, or in that period of time that the seven bowls are poured out. So that's what we see. We see in chapter 12 the first several are introduced, and who can tell me who those first several major characters are? Remember, the first one's the woman who is? Israel, right? The woman's Israel, okay, and the woman had a son who was caught up to heaven. It was the dragon tried to kill him, but he was caught up to heaven, so the son is? Jesus, there we go, okay. And so the dragon, of course, who's trying to kill him is? Satan. So we know all those guys, right? So, and of course, then the part of that story, and we were trying to decide whether that was, at that midpoint in the tribulation, or whether it was the initial fall, but we talked about the dragon fighting with? And his name is? Michael, right, the archangel. So that battle took place between the angels, and Satan was kicked out, and he was angry, so he went after the woman and the woman's children. So, we have that kind of stuff going on in 12. But again, that's by way of sort of, okay, who are these characters who are going to be involved in that period of time, that great tribulation? All right? So we got to 13 last session, and we talked about 13. We introduced two more characters, and of course it had to be in chapter 13, right? I mean, what better number to introduce these two characters? So those two characters were? Beast from the sea and beast from the land, okay? So again, we have wrapped up in that sort of the false government, false religion, all of those kinds of things, the Antichrist, the false prophet, all of those are kind of tied into that scenario, however you play with those two beasts. What we do know, if we think about the term beast, right? Whatever else we know, I just want you to think with me for a second. And of course, the beast from the sea is described, and they give him the parts that the ancient kingdoms had, in Daniel's prophecy. But I just want you to think with me for a second about the term beast. What do you think when you hear the word beast? What characteristics does the beast have? Evil?
Mean.
Aggressive? Mean? Keep going.
Dangerous.
Dangerous, thank you. Right? Trustworthy?
No.
Okay, very good. Okay, so everybody gets it. I mean, when you're talking about a beast, you're talking about something like dangerous, unruly, not to be trusted. What's the word I'm looking for? It's sporadic. Sort of like you don't know what's going to happen and when, because you can't trust them. They're wild. They're wild. That's what makes them a beast, right? So that's what we're dealing with. So I just want you to hear that for a second as we move to chapter 14, because what you're going to find is that a lot of people will read 12 through 14 and they'll go, yeah, it's the characters who are going to be playing a part in the Great Tribulation, and they'll walk through 12 through 14 and they'll introduce them, but they won't talk about the relationship, and that's what I want to do now, talk about the relationship between chapter 13 and chapter 14. If you remember everything that we read in chapter 13 about the mark of the beast and the deception, and he's blaspheming God, and he's speaking, evil words, and causing people to worship the beast. Remember all those kinds of things? And the 666, of course, comes up in chapter 13. So you've got all that horrible stuff, and along with that is that during that period of time, that last 3.5 years, he's given authority to overcome the saints. Isn't he? Remember that? Okay? So basically to kill the saints, or to kill believers. So I want you to hear all those things as we start to look at chapter 14, because what you're going to find is that chapter 14 is actually a contrast. It's the flip side. So if you see it that way, it just, hopefully you guys will be like I was. I was like, oh, the light just went on. That there's this big contrast going on about what's happening during the Great Tribulation between Satan and his emissaries or his agents, and God and his emissaries and his agents. And what we're going to find is that chapter 14 is all about the flip side of chapter 13. In other words, it's all about God, his emissaries, his agents, and his activity during the Great Tribulation. So, what I did in the middle of the first page of notes is gave you a table to kind of show you how those things line up. So just take a look at it if you would. If we compare chapter 13 and 14, what you see in chapter 13 is beasts, right? The two beasts. Chapter 14, the very first thing you see is the lamb, right? That's just what we just said when we talked about the beasts. Beasts, lamb. Which one are you going to go with?
Lamb.
Is that a serious question, right? Okay, but just hear me, and obviously this lamb is a soldier, and he's a victorious soldier and a victorious king, so keep that in mind as well. But the picture here is beast versus lamb, right? Pretty cool, in terms of contrast. Chapter 13, when you talk about the beast, you talk about blasphemy and deception. Chapter 14, and especially when you're talking about the 144,000 that show up in chapter 14, they have no deceit and no falsehood in their mouth. Contrast. All right. Chapter 13, the beasts give the mark of the beast, right? Chapter 14, the 144,000, what do they have? The name of their father, or the mark of their father on their forehead. Okay, so again, a contrast. The beast is worshipped by unbelievers in chapter 13. The lamb is followed by the 144,000 in chapter 14, wherever he goes. Okay? All right. Now, take a look at the next one. Saints are killed in chapter 13. At the end of chapter 14, what do you have? Yeah. The other side, right? The unbelievers are killed. All right? Through the, big end of chapter 14. I think it should be 14 through 20, if I'm not mistaken. But in any case, small mistake. All right, chapter 13. Uh-oh. I flipped them. Yeah, I flipped them. Sorry. Yep, sorry. Second mistake. Let me get a pen. All right, that one I do need to change. Because obviously, tormented forever with no rest is the results of chapter 13. Maybe that's why I swapped them. But whereas what's said about the believers who die during the Great Tribulation is what? That they may rest, they'll be blessed, and have no more torment. So, whereas the unbelievers are tormented forever. So you have this big contrast, and we'll see that when we read the text. In the text, it's very, very clear that there's a complete 180 when you're talking about the end of the unbeliever versus the end of the believer. Okay? And lastly, we got the short-term victory over the saints that's the beasts have in chapter 13 versus the complete victory over evil throughout the tail end of chapter 14. So again, all of these things point to the fact that chapter 14 is really a contrast to pretty much everything that we saw in chapter 13. Like, work for everybody? Okay. One of the things that I see when I look at things like this is, for me, it's another thing of inspiration. It's another thing where I go, who writes this? who can write, what human being could come up with this? Because hopefully by now, if you've worked through enough of Revelation, what you see is it's like, how many layers are they communicating on? I mean, everybody's seeing that they're communicating in layers with the numbers and the ideas and the contrasts that are going on. And, we looked at the 7 letters where the beginning of the letter points back and the end of the letter points forward. And, all of the letters fit together as a whole. It's like, how many layers, can you, who does that? And I don't know about you, but for me, that's just another proof of inspiration. I just look at that and go, that's a God thing. Come up with a book like Revelation. All right. That being said, let's dig in. Chapter 14, verse 1. Then I looked, and behold, a lamb standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his name and his father's name written on their foreheads. So, in the contrast of the mark of the beast, 144,000 have the mark of their father, who is God, of course. The scene here, if you're talking about Jesus standing on Mount Zion, the idea is the victorious king, right? When would that be? Second coming, right? Okay, so the picture here is a picture of the second coming and Christ in victory with all his troops, the 144,000, his elite troops, so to speak. So, Mount Zion would be sort of the center point of the war. And I don't know about you guys, but, for me, it's kind of an ironic thing. If you think about Jesus, and he's this victorious, conquering king, and they said it's a lamb. That's all a lamb standing on Mount Zion. Like so many things in Scripture, first will be last, last will be first, and when you think about things like this, I didn't come to be served, but to serve, and yet I'm God the Son. It's like, so many of those things like that. But here is this victorious king, but he's pictured as the one who gave his life for us. Wow. Pretty cool. All right. Chapter 14, verses 2 and 3. I heard a voice from heaven like the voice of many waters, like the voice of loud thunder. Knowing even just other places in Revelation, who are we talking about here? God the Father. Right. And I heard the sound of harpists playing their harps. They sang as it were a new song before the throne, before the living creatures and the elders. And who can remember, because we've already seen this concept or idea of a new song earlier in Revelation. Do you remember? Does anybody remember what a new song typically was for?
The only one who's worthy to be.
Okay, well, it's to God the Father, right? And when we saw it earlier, it was actually aimed at Jesus, which was one of the surprising things. I think it was Revelation 5, if I'm not mistaken. But can anybody remember the context of new song in terms of when it's used in the Old Testament? It's usually God's redemptive work, and it's usually victory over enemies. It's because God redeemed us or rescued us from our enemies. And what's just happened here? God has done this redemptive work in judging all of his enemies, and so Christ and his 144,000 are standing victorious in Mount Zion. So how particularly appropriate that they would sing a new song. All right? So, and they sang it before the 4 living creatures and the elders. No one could learn that song except the 144,000 who were redeemed, you hear? Okay, redeemed from the earth. So, and victorious and kept by him, rescued by him throughout that period of time. So, all right, that's easy enough. So we'll move on from there. Verses 4 and 5. These are the ones who are not defiled with women, for they are virgins. These are the ones who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. These were redeemed from among men, being first fruits to God and to the Lamb. And in their mouth was found no deceit, for they are without fault before the throne of God. And so, do you think this might be a problem passage for some people? Yeah. Why? Where are you going to find 144,000 soldiers who are virgins? Okay, so it's, honestly, that's what a lot of people wrestle with. A lot of the commentaries I read, they kind of scratch their head and go, is this reality? Is it how does this work? Well, I just want you to think about what's going on. I mean, think about what is happening when these people are alive and when these people are encountering what they're encountering. I mean, think about the Second World War, for instance. If you were a person of integrity, you were a soldier in World War II, and you were a person of integrity, do you think you would have any time to spend any time with a woman at all, ever? Why? Because you're fighting, right? You're trying to stay alive.
Not a whole lot of women.
Yeah, and you're on a battlefront. You're on a battlefront. I mean, as long as you put it into context, this is not problematic. This should not be problematic, because what we're talking about is a war zone where battles are taking place and lives are being lost, and it's the most catastrophic time in the entirety of human history, and what we're saying is that there are these guys who are said, I'm making the commitment. I'm making the commitment. I'm going to follow the Lamb, and I'm sticking with him, and I'm going to do whatever he says. He's my general, so to speak. I'm going to go wherever he goes, and I'm going to fight with him. And that's all there is to it. So the idea, just like Paul calling the church, that he wanted to present the church as a chaste virgin, along with the idea of the Jewish wedding that we talked about. And that's in 2 Corinthians 11:2, I think, if I didn't put that down on the page. Just like that, I think the idea is that there was purity because of their integrity. They said, I'm going to do what he tells me. I'm going to do whatever he tells me. I'm going wherever he goes. So that whole idea of purity and commitment is built into that. All right? So, and can you say more than that? Maybe. But we can at least say that for sure. And, the text tells us they followed him wherever he went. They followed the Lamb wherever he goes. Okay? They were redeemed from among men, being first fruits to God and to the Lamb. Somebody tell me a little bit about first fruits. Anybody? What does it mean to be a first fruit? Okay. Cream of the crop, without blemish. Again, this is the whole idea of purity, integrity, commitment. We kind of tie all those things together, right? If you were a shepherd and you had, 10 sheep, you look for the best one and you say, that's the first fruit. That's the one I'm going to tithe with. If you were, an Old Testament Jew, and we're going to do that. So, that's what he says about these guys. They were the first fruits. They're the first. They're the best. And of course, look at their level of commitment. Look at their calling. Look at what they're doing in the middle of the Great Tribulation. Of course, right? All right. All right. So they are without fault before the throne of God. Do you think that necessarily means that they were perfect? No. But it does mean that they were absolutely committed. And I think in that environment, that's pretty much what it would take, huh? If you're thinking about their context, that's pretty tough context. All right. So we've seen this 144,000. We've seen the Lamb. They're on Mount Zion, and they're singing the new song. So, one other thing too. You notice that it says there was no deceit or falsehood. There was no deception. Again, that's that big contrast to chapter 13, isn't it? Because everything about chapter 13, not only the deceivers, but the deceived, it's all about deception. And it's whether you buy it or not. And what it says about these guys, you got 144,000 guys, I don't buy any of it. And not only do I not buy any of it, I'm not going to say it. Everything I say will be in line with truth. All right? So, big contrast. Okay. And sorry, I've got the pollen thing going on a little bit, so forgive me for that. But let's look at verses 6 and 7. Let's keep going. I saw another angel flying in the midst of heaven. Midst of heaven gets translated several different ways. I'm not sure if it does in this, in the text that I gave you. Let's see. Through the sky, mid-heaven, midst of heaven. All right. Sometimes you'll hear it in the middle of heaven, and it's kind of confusing, but the idea is overhead in the sky. So I think New Living is just fine there, flying through the sky. Having the everlasting gospel to preach to those who dwell on the earth. Those who dwell on the earth are? No, earth dwellers are who? Unbelievers, right? It's a technical term in Revelation. Underline it, guys. Technical term in Revelation. Anytime you hear that, those who dwell on the earth, the ones who dwell on the earth, it's unbelievers. All the way through Revelation. Technical term. You'll see it every time, and every time you see it, you can count on it, meaning unbelievers. All right? So, sorry, let me find out where I was. All right, to preach the everlasting gospel, to preach to those who dwell on the earth, to every nation, tribe, tongue, and people, saying with a loud voice, fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment has come. That sound like gospel to you guys? Okay? I mean, everybody here, that's a little, something's a little askew, because when we think gospel, we think good news, right? Okay? So, hour of his judgment has come. Worship him who made heaven and earth, the springs, the sea and springs of water. So, the context here is this angel is proclaiming to those who dwell on the earth, to the unbelievers, he's saying, hour of his judgment's come. Get ready. Here it comes. All right. And the second and the third angel basically continue the message. So if you're talking about the everlasting gospel, you know, it's good news, but good news to whom?
To the believers.
To us, right. Remember, chapter 14 is the flip side to 13. So if we're talking about good news, that's not good news, and it wouldn't be good news to them if I'm Joe unbeliever, and I say, you know, God's getting ready to judge me. You know, that's not good news. I see that. I mean, you get that, right? But to the believer who says, you know, I'm being persecuted and I'm being killed, you know, we're getting slaughtered here, you know, to me, that's good news. Finally, right? I mean, remember the martyrs under the throne? What do they say? You know, how long? How long? You know, how long before you take them out? Right? We want some good news. See? I mean, you hear it that way? All right. So, and it is a call to worship, of course, but, you know, it doesn't get, you know, and I think I said, if you combine this message with the next two angels, you'll see it, while it is a call to repentance, or in other words, a change of thinking where you worship instead of reject, it is primarily a message of impending doom. And the reason that it's good news is God will rule his kingdom, and he will be king. That is good news. You know, that is good news. All right. So, you know, and I decide whom this day whom you will serve. So, all right, verse 8. Another angel followed, saying, Babylon is fallen, that great city, because she has made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. So, pretty bad stuff. But again, if you put it in the context of these three angels are giving this message as they're, you know, essentially flying around the globe, and they're giving this message, and they're saying, you know, judgment has come, Babylon has fallen, and the reason she's fallen is because she's done all this evil stuff. You know, she's made all the nations drink of this horrible stuff, right? Deceived everybody, so she's going to pay. City, you know, the city as a representative of something else, which we'll talk about in the future, chapter 17 and 18. We'll talk about that later. But the idea is, you're going to pay. You're going to pay. Consequences are now. Consequences are coming. All right, verses 9 through 11, the continuation. Sorry. A third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, if anyone worships the beast in his image and receives his mark on his forehead or on his hand, he himself shall also drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out full strength into the cup of his indignation. Let me just stop. Okay. Like, I don't know about you guys, but that's a mouthful, right? I mean, just that little bit is like, whoa. You take the mark and you get, let me just read it one more time, because He will drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out full strength into the cup of his indignation. Ow! Okay? So the wrath is the wine that gets poured into the cup of his indignation, right? Full strength, and the unbeliever gets to drink it. Okay? Now, I don't know what images come to your mind, but the wine, if wine is wrath and it's poured out full strength, and that's what the unbelievers will experience, is this full strength of this wrath that has been poured out, okay? And they get to drink. Like, what does that look like? What does it look like? That's the first thing I'm thinking. I'm going, okay, cyanide, poison, gasoline, right? I mean, that's kind of where your mind goes. It's where my mind went when I started thinking about it in terms of just the image. But, I mean, think about what he's saying. The wrath of God poured into a cup that you get to drink because you rejected him. And it's full strength. It's full strength. That's what's coming. Okay? Now see, that's all built into this gospel, this good news. All right? Well, it is good news in terms of it's the end. It's the end. We finally won't have an enemy anymore. We don't have to worry about our enemy anymore. We don't have to be tormented or persecuted anymore. We can live in the truth now. We can live in love and grace and joy and peace and kindness and gentleness. Right?
Yes.
Is that good news?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
At least we 1,000 anyway.
Yeah, and then for eternity, yeah. Right, and then for that little short time, yeah, you're right about that. All right, I won't belabor that, but that's fun. Okay, we'll keep going with 9 through 11 here. He shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb, and the smoke of their torment ascends for how long? Okay? So the believer or the saints, during the second half of the tribulation in chapter 13, they're persecuted because the beast is given authority to overcome the saints, right, during that period of time. So that's what you have in chapter 13, but what he says is, while the saints get persecuted for that 3.5-year period, guess what? The unbeliever, the torment, the smoke from their torment, is up forever and ever. Forever and ever. Forever and ever. How long does that last? Forever and ever. And the people who say, oh, there's no hell. What do you do with, if you're going to say that you believe Scripture, what do you do with this passage?
Sounds like hell to me.
Yeah. Yes. And they have no rest day or night. The smoke of their torment ascends forever and ever, and they have no rest day or night. No rest day or night. I mean, if you think about heaven and hell, and we'll do that for just a second because I don't want to spend too much time there. But if we think about the gap or the difference between heaven and hell, who is the creator of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, and all things good? Who is the creator? Okay? So what is a good reason for hell then? You went through your whole life saying that you didn't want to have anything to do with him. Is he not just to say, okay, you went through your entire life saying that you did not want to be with me, you did not want to have anything to do with me, and yet in my presence there's love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, and we can go on and on. Everything good. And what you've said is, you don't want a part of that. Okay.
I probably will remember how many times people tried to come and talk to me.
Okay,
It will
but
probably come to my mind.
just think for a second of what that means. Because what you're saying is, okay, if that's what God's presence is like, imagine God's absence. Imagine the absence of love, joy, peace, no love, no joy. Okay? I don't have to keep going, do I? I don't know about you guys. Can you imagine that? What that would be like?
You know,
And it's forever. It's forever. You have the absence of all of that because the goodness of God is not there.
think about how bad things are now with His Spirit here. How much worse is it going to be when it's not here?
Yeah. Yeah. How much craziness there is in the world. Whew.
I don't
All
want
right.
to hear.
Yeah. All right. Anyway, so that's the final warning. And one last thing, how many angels announced that message? 3. Okay. So just, just for those of you who are into the numbers thing. Okay. Let's go on with verse 12. Here is the patience of the saints. Here are those who keep, and here are those is actually what's called a majority manuscript. I believe the majority of manuscripts reflect the best, are the best evidence. And the best evidence is that those words aren't in there in the majority of manuscripts. So I would just read that. Here is the patience of the saints who keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. This verse is one of those that used to baffle me because it's not just here, it's in a couple of places in Revelation. We've seen it already, right? A couple of other times we've seen it already. But it's always in the context of punishment, and punishment of unbelief, and punishment of evil. So if you think about it in the context of the punishment of evil, why would you have a statement like, here is the patience of the saints, or here is the perseverance of the saints? Let me add a couple of words, and it'll make perfect sense, I think. Here is the reason for the perseverance or patience of the saints. Look at what will happen to those who are messing with you. There is your reason. There is your motivation to persevere. Because guess what will happen to them? And it won't happen to you. It won't happen to you. You get to be with the Father. You get to be in the presence of love and joy and peace and patience. So, here you are. Now you're suffering. Now you're going through trouble. But let me give you a reason to persevere. Look what's going to happen to them. So, from my perspective, that's why these show up. And if you look at where this kind of phrase, here is the perseverance and faith of the saints, or something like that in Revelation, it always follows some kind of, punishment of unbelievers or judgment against unbelievers. Okay? And now you know why. All right. Let's go on with verse 13. Then I heard a voice from heaven saying to me, "Write, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on." Yes, says the Spirit. Yeah. Remember what he just said right before, okay? In 9 through 11. Smoke of their torment ascends forever and ever, and they have no rest day or night. And then look what he says here, right? Blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Yes, says the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors. Blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on, and their works follow them. Whew. So you've got a verse that serves as really two purposes here. It serves as a contrast, obviously, and that's what I was just pointing out. Because the unbelievers, no rest, torment, forever and ever, day and night, right? Pretty clear. Here it says, they're blessed because they rest. No more. No more torment. Wow. Okay? So, second, it serves as a confirmation or another reason to persevere. Okay? So those who die for their faith are promised rest and reward. Their works follow after them. Right? That's pretty cool. I may be persecuted now. I may be going through a hard time now. I may be suffering now. Anybody relate to that? I've heard pastors say, well, you're either going into a hard time, you're in a hard time, or you're going out of a hard time. Anybody heard that? Okay? So, most of us relate to that on a minor level compared to this. But what he says is, even here, look, what you're promised is rest and reward. Hang in there. I don't know about you. For me, that's awesome. Rest and reward. 2 for 2. Bring them on. All right. verses 14 through 16. Then I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and on the cloud sat one like the Son of Man, having on his head a golden crown. Stop there for a second. Who are we talking about? Jesus, okay? And how does that fit in the context? Again, we're sort of talking about these characters that are, in the Great Tribulation. So we got the one like the Son of Man, and he's sitting on a cloud. Anybody see any relationship to anything else they remember? What's part of the picture of Jesus in Revelation chapter 1? Behold, he's coming with clouds. Yeah, right? And every eye will see him. And it's talking about the second coming. So, very, very cool that here we see a little bit of that. Sort of a small picture of what that's going to look like. But look at what else he has. In his hand, a sharp sickle. Another angel came out of the temple, crying with a loud voice to him who sat on the cloud, "Thrust in your sickle and reap, for the time has come for you to reap. For the harvest of the earth," and the idea is the harvest, which is the earth, is ripe. So he who sat on the cloud thrust in his sickle on the earth, and the earth was reaped. The earth was reaped. The whole earth was reaped. Okay? What are we talking about?
People of the earth.
Say again?
People of the earth, the non-believers.
Those who dwell on the earth, right? Okay? Sickle, reaping, right? Harvest, right? Taken away. Okay? So, this is a picture of a grain harvest, by the way. And if you know about the grain harvest, you wait until the grain is dried up, all right? So that it's ripe in the sense, and it's a very specific word in Greek, and that's what's here. And that's one of the reasons that it's sort of this larger area, and he even says it's the harvest of the earth, right? And the tail end of it, it says, he thrust in his sickle on the earth, and the earth was reaped. And the idea is all of it. All of it. Those who dwell on the earth were reaped, harvested, so to speak. Everybody gets the idea. Okay? But the other piece of that picture, just if you think about it, is if we talk about ripe in the sense of grain, it's you wait and you wait and you wait and you wait until it's like almost too late. And what do we know about Scripture and what it says about God and His compassion? He's not willing that any should perish, right? He's going to wait, he's going to keep, consider the patience of our Lord to be salvation. Right? So, this fits very well with that he said, look, I waited until it was ripe, like last minute kind of ripe in terms of grain. I don't know what other word you could use for ripe. I think that's probably why they translated it ripe, because I don't know about you, I think about fruit when I think about ripe, right? But here it's clearly a picture of a grain harvest, okay, worldwide. All right. Interesting thing about this is people will read the first harvest and then they'll read the second harvest in this passage and they'll say that, it's just a repetition. No. There are some really important differences, very, very interesting. So let's read 17 through 20 and then we'll finish up the chapter. Another angel came out of the temple which is in heaven, he also having a sharp sickle. And another angel came out from the altar who had power over fire, and he cried with a loud cry to him who had the sharp sickle, saying, "Thrust in your sharp sickle and gather the clusters of the vine of the earth, for her grapes are fully ripe." Different word for ripe. And here, of course, it means ripe like a grape or a fruit is ripe. That's the word that would be used in that scenario. So here we're talking about the harvest of a part of a vineyard that's ready. You wait until the grapes are ready and you say, okay, in this area, these grapes are ready. So what might this be speaking about if we stopped right there? Right off the top of your head, you probably would say it doesn't really sound the same as the grain harvest of the entire world, does it? No. Okay. All right, well, let's keep reading because he tells us basically. So the angel thrust his sickle into the earth and gathered the vine of the earth and threw it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. The great winepress of the wrath of God. And the wine press was trampled outside the city. So we have a location. And blood came out of the wine press, so we know there's battle. It's kind of up to the horses' bridles for 1,600 furlongs. So what are we probably talking about? Armageddon. Yeah. Isn't it interesting? Because again, I don't know about you, I've read those two and just kind of said, oh, it's like he's repeating himself, get a little different idea, but it's two different kinds of harvesting for two different purposes, but they both fit what he's trying to speak about. The first one is the 7 bowls, essentially. That last period of time where the wrath of God is just being poured out upon unbelievers, those who dwell on the earth. Okay? So it's the whole earth that's affected there. Whereas the grape harvest or the wine harvest, you're talking about this area where you say, okay, we're going to gather the grapes that are right there and smush them. And guess what he does in Armageddon? Smoosh it. Yeah. All right. Yeah. And it's very interesting. Trampled outside the city is the image that they give. And I mean, you've seen some of you've probably even seen the I Love Lucy thing where she's in the middle of the, okay? If you go back that far. But it's a funny episode. She's there on the wine thing, or the grapes thing, and they're trying to stomp on the grapes, right, to get the wine out. And he says, this blood came out of this wine press. So pretty serious deal. But also a contrast to the short-term pain that the beasts give to the saints during the second half of the tribulation, isn't it? It's an interesting contrast. And just remember, as we finish up this chapter, chapter 15 is what we're getting ready to talk about. Will now move the action forward. It seems like there's a lot of action going on here, and I get that. But really what I want you to think about is that 12 through 14, and we just finished 14, 12 through 14 are really just introducing the characters. They're not necessarily trying to move the action forward. They're just saying, okay, here's what this guy's like. We'll tell you a little bit more about what he does. And it's much more of a sort of a general overview, but it's pretty colorful. Pretty colorful.